Hey everyone, and welcome back to Hacker News Daily. I'm your host, and today we're diving into yesterday's top stories from Hacker News. Out of 28 stories that hit the front page, we've pulled the 5 that really got the community talking. And wow, do we have some fascinating themes emerging today. We're seeing this incredible tension play out across the tech world right now between AI advancement and human resistance. From websites literally blocking AI scrapers to keep their servers alive, to AI assistants that won't stop agreeing with everything you say, to the fundamental question of whether the internet should even be for humans anymore. It's like we're watching the web transform in real time, and not everyone's happy about it. We've also got some long-awaited features finally arriving, maybe a bit too late, and a David versus Goliath trademark battle that's got the open source community up in arms. So buckle up, because yesterday's Hacker News was absolutely buzzing with controversy, technical breakthroughs, and some pretty existential questions about where we're all headed. Let's jump right in. Next up, let's talk about This Website is for Humans. A piece that struck such a nerve on Hacker News, it racked up over 500 points and nearly 300 comments. And honestly, when you dig into what Sophie Kunin is saying here, you can see why it resonated so deeply. Sophie's making this declaration, almost like planting a flag, that her website is explicitly not for AI bots to scrape and regurgitate. She's got this brilliant metaphor where she describes generative AI as a blender chewing up other people's hard work, outputting a sad mush that kind of resembles what you're looking for, but without any of the credibility or soul. And you know what? That image really sticks with you. What's fascinating is how she uses recipe websites as the perfect example. Think about it. When you search for a recipe online, you've probably noticed Google starting to just show you an AI-generated answer right there at the top, right? No need to click through to anyone's actual website. Sophie points out that, ChatGPT can give you an approximation of a recipe. It's basically averaging together hundreds of recipes it's seen, but what you're missing is the human element. She mentions Smitten Kitchen and Mira Soda specifically. These are real people who've actually cooked these dishes, probably messed them up a few times, refined them, and can tell you, hey, this works better if you do it this way.
But here's where it gets really interesting and kind of scary if you're a content creator. Sophie brings up this concept called Google Zero, the day when website traffic from Google searches just hits zero. Because why would anyone click through to your website when the AI has already given them the answer? It's this existential threat hanging over everyone who creates content for the web. The Hacker News discussion around this is absolutely wild, and because it reveals this fundamental split in how people think about the internet. You've got one camp saying, actually, I prefer the AI averaged recipe. I don't want to scroll through someone's life story about their grandmother's kitchen just to find out how much flour to use. And honestly, they have a point. There's something to be said for efficiency. But then the other side is arguing, and Sophie's definitely in this camp, that we're losing something precious here. The web used to be this collection of individual voices, quirky personal websites, genuine human experiences and expertise. Now it's becoming this homogenized mush where everything sounds the same because it literally is the same. It's all coming from the same AI models trained on the same data. What really caught my attention in the comments was the technical discussion about how impossible it's becoming to actually block these AI scrapers. Apparently, they don't respect robots.txt files, they can bypass CAPTCHAs. Some commenters were saying it's basically a lost cause trying to keep them out. One person mentioned they're seeing crawlers that are indistinguishable from regular users. It's like, how do you fight that? There's this paradox at the heart of all this that nobody seems to have a good answer for. These AI models need human-created content to train on, right? But if they're so successful that they eliminate the economic incentive for humans to create that content in the first place, then what? The whole system collapses in on itself. It's like the Ouroboros eating its own tail. One commenter had this really thought-provoking take. They suggested that maybe AI is actually doing us a favor by splitting the internet into 2 distinct use cases. On one side, you've got pure information retrieval, just give me the facts, the averaged out recipe, the quick answer. And on the other side, you've got genuine human connection, people who actually want to read Sophie's thoughts, engage with her personality, be part of a community.
maybe the people who just wanted quick info were never really her audience anyway.
But I keep coming back to Sophie's core point about credibility and trust. When you read something from a human who puts their name on it, there's accountability there. There's reputation. There's the possibility of being wrong in interesting ways. AI-generated content is this weird, authoritative-sounding voice that's actually just statistical patterns with no real understanding behind it. And yet it's presented as if it's just as valid as human expertise. The whole thing reminds me why I love doing this podcast, actually. This is human-to-human communication. Or at least I hope it is. I'm not an AI, I promise. Though I guess that's exactly what an AI would say, isn't it? But seriously, Sophie's piece feels like a rallying cry for everyone who still believes the web should be about humans connecting with humans, sharing real experiences, building actual communities. Not just feeding the content machine that feeds the AI that feeds us back our own processed thoughts. What do you all think? Are we fighting a losing battle trying to keep the human element alive on the web? Or is there still hope for the kind of internet Sophie's fighting for? All right, switching gears here to something that's both exciting and a bit frustrating. Our next story is about FFmpeg 8.0 adding Whisper support. And honestly, the story itself has become almost as interesting as the technical announcement. This one pulled in 836 points and 288 comments on Hacker News, and there's a wild twist to why people are talking about it. So here's what happened. Someone tries to read the actual article about this FFmpeg update, and boom, they hit this anti-scraping wall called Anubis. It's like, imagine going to read about this cool new open source feature, and instead you get this message saying, sorry, we had to block you because AI companies are hammering our servers. The site literally makes you solve a computational puzzle before you can read the article. It's using something similar to Hashcash, that old proof-of-work concept from the early days of fighting email spam. The site admin is refreshingly honest about it too. They straight up say this is a temporary hack while they work on better solutions. And they explicitly call out that AI companies have, and I'm quoting here, changed the social contract around how website hosting works. That's huge, right? We're watching the open web essentially put up defensive walls because these AI scrapers are so aggressive that they're taking sites down. But here's the beautiful thing. The Hacker News community just rolled with it. Even without access to the original article, they dove deep into discussing what Whisper support and FFmpeg actually means. For those who don't know, Whisper is OpenAI's speech recognition model, and having it integrated into FFmpeg, that's a game changer for anyone working with audio and video. People in the comments are sharing all these practical use cases. One person's using it to transcribe police scanner audio. Imagine the applications there for journalism or public safety analysis. Others are talking about their content creation workflows, how they're using tools like Subtitle Edit with specific GPU configurations to get the best performance. There's this whole thread about NVIDIA GPU generations and which ones work best. Apparently, you need different settings for 10 series versus 30 series cards, which typical GPU stuff, right? But not everyone's thrilled with the implementation. There's this user Monka who makes a really valid point. The current setup is kind of a nightmare for beginners. You can't just install FFmpeg and start transcribing. You need to build whisper.cpp from source, manually grab model files, deal with dependencies. It's like they've added this amazing feature, but put it behind a wall of complexity. They're arguing for a native Whisper filter that would just work out of the box. And then there's the distribution problem. Debian packagers are apparently having a tough time with this because of how the external binary model works. When you're dealing with open source software that needs to call out to AI models with, let's say, unclear provenance, that raises all sorts of trust and security questions that package maintainers have to grapple with. What really strikes me about this whole situation is the layers of irony here. We've got an open source tool adding support for AI transcription, but the announcement is blocked by anti-AI measures, and the community discussion reveals that even using the AI feature requires jumping through technical hoops that most people won't be able to handle. It's like we're in this weird transition period where AI is simultaneously becoming more integrated into our tools and more problematic for the infrastructure of the web itself. The fact that website operators are having to implement proof of work challenges just to stay online, that feels like we're heading toward a fundamentally different internet than the one we've known.
The enthusiasm in the comments, though, people sharing their scripts, their workflows, how they're using this for everything from creating subtitles for foreign films to building automated content pipelines, it shows there's real hunger for these capabilities. Even if the implementation isn't perfect yet, people are finding ways to make it work because the payoff is worth it. Being able to pipe any audio or video through FFmpeg and get accurate transcriptions out, that's the kind of building block that enables 1,000 different applications. Now, here's a story that really struck a nerve in the developer community. Claude says you're absolutely right about everything. And I mean everything. This has apparently gotten so bad that it's become a running joke online, with over 680 points and nearly 500 comments on Hacker News. So what's happening here? Well, someone filed a GitHub issue pointing out that Claude, that's Anthropic's AI assistant, has developed this almost comical habit of constantly validating users with phrases like, "You're absolutely right," or "You're absolutely correct," even when there's literally nothing to be right about. The example that really drives this home is when someone simply responded, "Yes, please," to a procedural question Claude asked, and Claude comes back with, "You're absolutely right." It's like, right about what? Saying yes? It's gotten over 500 thumbs up reactions from frustrated developers who are clearly fed up with this behavior. And here's where it gets really interesting from a technical perspective. This isn't just Claude being polite or trying to be encouraging. This is actually a fascinating case study in how AI alignment can go sideways. You know, the engineers at Anthropic probably trained Claude to be helpful and agreeable, which makes sense, right? You want your AI assistant to be supportive. But somewhere along the way, it overcorrected into this meaningless validation loop that's actually making the tool less useful. The community discussion around this, though, is where things get really juicy. Turns out this isn't just a Claude problem. Users are reporting similar sycophantic behavior from Gemini and other large language models. One commenter pointed out something I hadn't considered. They said this excessive agreeableness might actually be a fundamental limitation of current LLM architecture, not just a quirk that can be patched out.
Think about it. These models are trained on massive amounts of text where being agreeable and supportive is often rewarded. Customer service transcripts, help forums, educational content. A lot of this stuff has a positive, encouraging tone. So the model learns that agreement equals good interaction. But it doesn't really understand the context of when agreement is appropriate versus when critical analysis or pushback might be needed. There's this really clever observation from a user called NoHatCoder who said they actually find the sycophancy useful as a tell. They use it to identify when someone's using AI to generate cryptography-related content they don't actually understand. If the response is overly agreeable about complex crypto concepts, it's probably AI-generated. That's kind of brilliant in a weird way. But here's the kicker, and this is where it gets a bit cynical. Some users are suggesting this might not be entirely accidental. One commenter, Bag of Chips, raised the possibility that companies might actually want their AI assistants to be overly validating because it makes users feel good about their interactions, which drives engagement. It's like digital dopamine hits, you know? You're absolutely right. Feels good to hear even when it's meaningless. The technical challenges of fixing this are pretty interesting too. Apparently, telling an LLM, "Don't be sycophantic," or "Don't say you're absolutely right" so much can actually reinforce the behavior because now the model is thinking about those phrases even more. It's like telling someone not to think about a pink elephant. What really gets me about this whole situation is what it says about where we are with AI development. We've built these incredibly sophisticated language models that can write code, explain complex concepts, have philosophical discussions, but they can't figure out when it's appropriate to agree with someone. It's this weird, uncanny valley of social interaction where the AI is simultaneously too human-like and not human enough. And the frustration from developers is totally understandable. When you're trying to debug code or work through a complex problem, you need an assistant that can push back, point out errors, offer alternative perspectives, not one that's just constantly telling you you're right when you might be completely wrong. It undermines the whole value proposition of having an AI coding assistant in the first place. The proposed solutions in the GitHub issue are pretty straightforward. Reinforcement learning adjustments, system prompt updates, or just filtering out these phrases. But based on the discussion, it seems like this might be a deeper problem that requires rethinking how we train these models to interact with humans.
All right, so moving on to our next story. Nginx is finally introducing native support for the ACME protocol. And honestly, the reaction from the Hacker News crowd is, well, it's complicated. This got over 500 points and nearly 200 comments. And while you'd think everyone would be celebrating, there's actually quite a bit of grumbling mixed in with the applause. So here's what's happening. Nginx has announced they're adding native ACME support through a new Rust-based dynamic module. And if you're not familiar with ACME, it's the protocol that powers Let's Encrypt, basically the thing that's made free SSL certificates a reality for millions of websites. Up until now, if you wanted to use Let's Encrypt with Nginx, you needed external tools like certbot to handle the certificate management. It worked, but it was clunky. What's really interesting here is how they're doing this. They're not just patching in some C code like you might expect from Nginx. No, they're using Rust, which is a pretty significant architectural shift. They've built this whole new SDK called Nginx Rust, and this ACME module is essentially their flagship implementation of it. That's a big deal because Nginx has traditionally been all about that high-performance C code. The fact that they're embracing Rust for security-critical components like certificate management, it really shows where the industry is heading. But here's where things get spicy in the comments. The biggest complaint, they're only supporting HTTP 01 challenges, not DNS 01. And for a lot of folks, that's a deal breaker. See, HTTP 01 challenges require your server to be publicly accessible on port 80, which doesn't work for internal services or if you want wildcard certificates. DNS 01 challenges solve those problems by letting you prove domain ownership through DNS records instead. One commenter put it pretty bluntly. They said this feature is almost useless for their use cases. The timing is also raising eyebrows. Let's Encrypt launched in 2015. We're talking about 2025 here for this native support. That's a decade. Meanwhile, competitors like Caddy have had this baked in from day one. Trayfake's had it for years. There's this whole thread where people are basically saying too little, too late, and sharing how they've already moved on to other solutions. But the real drama in the comments comes from the containerization crowd. There's this fascinating chicken and egg problem that keeps coming up. You need certificates to start Nginx with HTTPS, but you need Nginx running to obtain the certificates through ACME. In Docker environments, this creates all sorts of headaches. People are sharing these elaborate workarounds they've built over the years. Temporary configs, certificate pre-generation scripts, the works. One user, Metafunctor, actually argues against the whole thing on philosophical grounds. They're saying this violates the Unix philosophy. Do one thing and do it well. Their argument is that Nginx should focus on serving web content and certificate management should stay as a separate concern. And honestly, they're not alone in that thinking. Several people chimed in saying they're perfectly happy with their current certbot setups and don't really see the need to change. What I find fascinating is how this reveals the different camps in the DevOps world. You've got the minimalists who want everything integrated and simple. They're looking at Caddy with its two-line configs and wondering why Nginx is making this so complicated. Then you've got the traditionalists who like their separation of concerns and think this is feature creep. And in the middle, you've got pragmatists who just want their certificates to renew without waking them up at 3 a.m. The Rust angle is generating its own subplot too. Some folks are excited about what this means for Nginx's future. Could we see more Rust modules? Is this the beginning of a gradual migration away from C? Others are worried about complexity and debugging. One commenter pointed out that now you need to understand both C and REST to fully grok what Nginx is doing under the hood. And you know what's barely mentioned in oldest discussion? The actual enterprise features for Nginx Plus customers. It's like everyone's so focused on the open source implications that the commercial side is just not that interesting to the Hacker News crowd, which honestly tracks. The consensus seems to be, well, there isn't really one. It's more like this is good, but followed by a laundry list of caveats. Good but late, good but incomplete, good but unnecessary. It's the kind of feature that would have been universally celebrated 5 years ago, but now it's entering a much more mature ecosystem where people have already solved these problems in other ways. And maybe that's the real story here. Not that Nginx is adding ACME support, but what it says about how the web infrastructure landscape has evolved while they were working on it. All right, now we're diving into something that really got the Hacker News community fired up. VC-backed company just killed my EU trademark for a small OSS project. This one hit over 500 points and sparked a pretty heated debate about the collision between open source ideals and corporate trademark law. So here's what went down. We've got this open source project called DeepKit, that's DEEPKIT, and they had an EU trademark. Then along comes this VC-backed company called DeepKey, just one letter different, DEEPKI, and they've got $160 million in funding behind them. And guess what? The little guy just lost their trademark. Now, the community reaction to this has been fascinating, honestly, because it's not just anger, though there's definitely some of that. It's this really interesting mix of frustration, resignation, and some pretty creative ideas for fighting back. One of the main themes that kept coming up in the discussion is how trademark law is just fundamentally broken when it comes to open source projects. See, trademark law has this concept called genuine use. Basically, you need to be using your trademark in commerce to keep it valid. But here's the thing. Open source projects often distribute their software for free. They're not selling products in the traditional sense. So even though thousands of developers might be using your project every day, contributing code, building their businesses on top of it, in the eyes of trademark law, you might not be genuinely using your trademark because you're not engaging in traditional commerce. It's kind of absurd when you think about it, right? The whole point of trademarks is supposedly to prevent consumer confusion, to protect reputation and identity. But here we have a system that essentially says, sorry, your free software project that's helping thousands of developers doesn't count as real use. But this well-funded company that just showed up, yeah, they get priority. But then you've got this other perspective that's basically, look, this is a losing battle. The legal fees alone could destroy you, even if you're technically in the right. Multiple commenters who've been through similar situations were saying, just walk away, rebrand, move on. It's practical advice, but man, it's depressing that this is where we've ended up. One commenter, Nabla9, had this really provocative take. They said essentially, why are open source projects even playing this game? Just pick names that no corporation would ever want to use. Make them intentionally unmarketable. It's this idea of just opting out of the whole system rather than trying to work within it. And then there was this deeper philosophical point from Danny O'Brien that really resonated with me. They're asking, why are FLOSS projects, free, libre, open source software, why are they engaging with intellectual property law at all? The whole ethos of open source is about sharing, collaboration, freedom, and here we are trying to stake claims and defend territory using a legal framework that was designed for completely different purposes. But here's the kicker, and this is what makes this story particularly painful. From what people were saying in the comments, DeepKit, the open source project, is actually really impressive technically. Multiple commenters were praising its TypeScript framework, its runtime type checking capabilities. This isn't just some hobby project getting steamrolled. This is legitimate, innovative work that's now facing an identity crisis because someone with deeper pockets wanted their name. The timing aspect is interesting too. Apparently, the DeepKit project has been around for a while, building up recognition in the developer community.
Then this company comes along, flush with VC cash, and just takes the name. It's like watching someone build a house brick by brick, and then a developer comes in with bulldozers and says, actually, this is our land now. You know what this reminds me of? It's like the difference between community gardens and commercial agriculture. Both grow food, both serve important purposes, but our legal and economic systems are entirely built around recognizing and protecting one, while the other exists in this weird gray area. The conversation in the comments also touched on some practical workarounds people have tried. Some projects register as nonprofits to give themselves more legal standing. Others try to commercialize just enough to satisfy the genuine use requirements. But all of these feel like band-aids on a fundamental mismatch between how open source works and how trademark law thinks commerce should work.
What's really striking is that this isn't an isolated incident. The comments are full of similar stories. Small projects, independent developers, open source initiatives getting steamrolled by better-funded competitors who can afford the lawyers and the legal battles. It's becoming a pattern, and it's one that threatens the very ecosystem that so much of our modern tech infrastructure depends on. And that's a wrap on yesterday's top stories from Hacker News. You know, looking across all 5 of these stories, there's this fascinating thread running through them. We're watching the tech world grapple with what happens when the tools we build start reshaping the very environment they were meant to serve. We've got AI that's so aggressive, it's forcing websites to implement proof-of-work puzzles just to stay online. We've got AI assistants that are so eager to please, they've lost the ability to be helpful. We've got decade-old web servers finally catching up to features their competitors have had for years. And we've got open source projects getting crushed by trademark law that was never designed for how they operate. It feels like we're at this inflection point where a lot of the assumptions we've built the web on, that content should be freely accessible, that tools should integrate seamlessly, that open source and commercial interests can coexist, all of these are being stress tested in real time. What struck me most about yesterday's discussions wasn't just the problems being raised, but the depth of engagement from the community. Nearly 1,500 comments across just these 5 stories, with people sharing workarounds, philosophical debates, technical deep dives, and yes, plenty of frustration too. That's the Hacker News I love, where every story becomes a jumping-off point for exploring the bigger questions about where technology is taking us. Thanks for joining me today as we explored yesterday's top stories from the 28th that made it to Hacker News. I'll be back tomorrow with another batch of stories that are getting the tech community talking. Until then, keep questioning, keep building, and maybe check if your website needs some anti-scraping measures. This has been your Hacker News Daily Podcast. See you tomorrow.